Part 2. So, I got an amazing job right out of high school, 17 years old, wasn't quite 18 yet. I was making almost double what I was making at my previous job. I'd worked at McDonald's, which, you know, that's where you work when you're 16 and 17. When you're in fucking high school, you work at McDonald's. That's what you do. So, I got a job in the tech industry at an internet startup company, which was pretty amazing. It was the coolest job I had ever had. I mean, I just got to hang out all day long with a bunch of really cool people working on computers and testing shit and setting computers up and just doing shit I would have been doing at my home anyway, you know, dicking around with my own computer. And I got paid to do it. And I learned a lot of cool shit. That's where I learned how to be a Unix administrator. Not a lot of people had Sparks in their homes, so for me to use a Spark station was pretty cool. I got heavily involved with doing a lot of Sun Microsystems stuff. KeyLabs, they became the third-party certification testing facility for Sun Microsystems and a few other companies. And I got put on that team. I was doing the 100% pure Java certifications for Sun Microsystems through KeyLabs. People I worked with were just awesome. You know, they were you know, a good 10, 12 years older than me, but we just had a riot, and life was good, and things were just going great. And after my internship for that summer, they gave me a full-time position, and they gave me stock options. Not a ton, but for an 18-year-old kid, just having stock options was pretty mind-blowing at the time. I mean, I knew all about the companies in Silicon Valley that were just cranking out millionaires, and how you did it was you got to get some stock on the ground floor, and once that company IPOs or sells, you cash that shit out and you make a ton of money. And that's what I was all about. I was all about money. I wanted to retire by the age of 25, and I became consumed with that goal, like completely and utterly consumed with money. I remember when O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. I remember I was sitting in my first period physics class, and they brought the TVs out and they read the verdict and everybody was cheering, and I remember sitting there thinking, what the fuck? How did this guy not get charged with murder? And I came to the conclusion that he was rich and famous, and when you have a lot of money, you're powerful, and you can get away with murder. You can literally get away with murder if you're rich and powerful, and that kind of stuck with me. And I wanted to be rich. I wanted to be retired and drive a fancy car and live in a big fucking house and have all the cool shit that came with being rich. And I figured sticking with KeyLabs was going to be my ticket to that early retirement, and I came really close. To be honest, I came extremely close. One mouse click away from having almost enough fuck you money to retire with. And what happened was a very large company out of Silicon Valley came in and bought KeyLabs, a company called Exodus Communications. They basically were the data center company in the 90s and briefly the early 2000s. And they housed like every major website on the planet. I mean, Google it, Exodus Communications. They were the fucking shit at that time. So when Exodus came in and bought KeyLabs, everybody in the fucking company thought they had it made. because their stock was trading at crazy amounts, they were splitting like 2-3 times a year. And when you get a stock split and the amount of options that you own doubles, and then the company continues to do well and the stock price continues to go up, you can make a lot of money. So when the stock split the first time, for me, the stock had split numerous times in the past for a lot of previous employees of Exodus, but I got one split which gave me quite a few shares. So I had my original KeyLabs shares, and then Exodus issued me some more shares, and then I got a split. I had purchased all my KeyLabs options outright, so those were mine. And I had a really killer strike price. My strike price was $27.50 a share. And at their peak, Exodus was trading at $189 a share. And I had thousands of shares in this company. Granted, I wasn't 100% vested in all my Exodus shares, but I was more than 12 months vested on my Exodus shares, and I was fully vested on my KeyLabs shares. So I had a lot of money sitting there in my E-Trade account. All I had to do was click on the sell button, and that would have been that. I would have made a good chunk of money. I wouldn't have made like retirement money. If things would have kept going like they were going and the internet bubble didn't burst, I would have made a fucking load of money, like tons of money. You can go and look on the internet and see what Exodus stock did, and then it started tanking when the internet bubble burst, and when the .com bubble burst, their stock just tanked. And not only did I think the tanking was temporary, a lot of analysts and really smart people kept saying, oh, you know, this is just temporary. Nobody knew the fucking devastation that was about to happen from the bubble bursting. And, you know, when Exodus hit, you know, in the 70s, and then they hit in the 60s, all these people were coming out saying, oh, now's the time to buy. You know, the stock's just going to go back up. Now is the time to buy even more. The stock's only going to go up. So I took all my money that I had been saving, a big chunk of it, and I started buying more stock on the market, on the open market. So I had my shares and my options. I had my employee stock purchase plan that I was buying shares with, and then I was buying shares just through E-Trade on the open market. So I was putting a ton of money into Exodus. All my eggs almost into one basket. I put a lot of money in Oracle, I put a lot of money in Sun, and just got fucking burned by those guys. Like, just when things exploded, they exploded hard, and I lost it all. You know, I'm a fucking moron. I should have sold. You know, I got consumed with the greed, and the hype was real. The hype train was real. I remember every day when you would come into work, everybody would be sitting at their desk, and they'd have their Excel spreadsheets open, and they would have like their vesting period and then their stock, and like, if we get another split and on this day I'm gonna fucking be a millionaire. Like, that was the mentality. People were buying giant homes and plots of land that were super expensive. I went and test drove a Ferrari 360 Spider, which, you know, if that gives you any context of my mindset, you know, I remember I walked into this dealership and I want to test drive this fucking Ferrari, and you know, I had to show proof of insurance, and I had to show proof that I could actually pay for the car. You know, I'm just a fucking kid, you know, walking into a dealership, and they have these hundreds of $1,000 cars, and I was like, who the fuck is this kid? And I remember I only got it to test drive it on the back lot, but it was the coolest experience of my life, and I was sold. I was like, I need to retire and have a shit ton of money, and I need to have a fucking Ferrari and $1 million home and all this bullshit. So when it didn't happen, when the company finally went bankrupt and had to file bankruptcy, and just all of this shit just fell apart, I didn't know how to handle it. I honestly had no idea how to take this failure. Like, my hopes and dreams just like went up in fucking smoke right before my eyes. And I kept asking myself, why didn't I just sell when I had the chance? At least I would have $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. Like, why didn't I just dump my stock when I vested and it became available? Why didn't I just pull the trigger? And I learned a valuable lesson. Hindsight is 20/20, and I fucked up. I should have dumped. I should have sold it all. Something is better than nothing. I got jack shit from it. The only thing I got to do from all that stock being flushed down the toilet was I could write off my losses for a few years on my tax return, which just sucked ass, I mean, just, it wasn't the fucking same. I wasn't the same. I was just utterly destroyed at that point. And eventually I lost my job. KeyLabs, they tried to spin back out of Exodus and keep things going, but the market was just shitty, and a lot of people were starting to do their testing in-house, and nobody wanted to pay a shit ton of money for a third-party company to do all your load testing and your performance testing and all that. And so, a company that once employed 150 people before Exodus came in and purchased them, employed 20 people, and I was one of the last people to be let go, and it sucked. And, I did some shitty things there toward the end. I was pretty bitter about the situation and having to take a pay cut, for a kid in his early 20s, making $50K a year. That's a lot of money for a single kid making $50K a year. That was a good chunk of money in the early 2000s. And to having to take a pay cut down to $27K a year, it was shitty, and I hated it. But at least I had a job. There were a lot of way more qualified people out there than me that were out of a job. I mean, when that bubble burst, it fucking decimated the workforce, because a lot of people around here, they worked in the tech industry, and those jobs just vanished. And so you had a lot of guys that had, decade worth of experience, more than a decade at like WordPerfect and Novell, that were working shitty tech support jobs, and having to go work at fucking Wendy's and shit like that. And so I still had a job for a little bit before, KeyLabs pretty much just ran out of money, and they were limping along, and they did bare bones operation, and I was no longer an essential personnel anymore. Sun Microsystems had to do cutbacks, which means my contract was not renewed to test their certification program stuff, and I was gone. Not essential personnel. I was demoted to a red shirt, and I fucking thrown away. But it happens, and I had a hard time with that. Like, I was really bitter, I mean, I felt like I had come so far in my life, and I had gotten to this point where I was so close to making all my dreams come true and all that bullshit, and I let it slip away. I hadn't really dealt with failure up until that point in my life. Like, I don't want to say everything was kind of handed to me on a silver platter, because it sure as fuck wasn't. But things just kind of worked out for me, and I was kind of cocky, and I was definitely not humble at all. I was one of the most ungrateful fucking people on the planet. I got a lot of lucky breaks, and so when that failure like reared its head and kicked me in the balls and smacked me in the teeth, I didn't know how to fucking respond to it. And I wallowed in self-pity. I thought my life was over. I was 22, 23 years old, and I thought my whole fucking life was over. And, my life hadn't even fucking started at that point. 20, early 20s, you're still just a fucking kid. And I thought that was it for me. Like, never again am I going to taste success, and never again am I going to have this opportunity. And it wrecked me. It wrecked me hard. And my last day was March 8th, 2002. And I remember that day very distinctly. I remember going back to my apartment. I played some Tony Hawk Pro Skater on my Game Boy Advance, and I sat and I stewed in my apartment, just fuming, angry, pissed. And I signed up for unemployment and all that bullshit. And I remember when I got my first unemployment check, it was so small. I remember thinking, what in the fuck? How can anybody live off of unemployment? Because I'd always heard these stories of these people who just live on unemployment forever. And I was like, how can anybody live on unemployment? Holy shit, this is like hardly any money at all. And I was really bitter about that. I had a little money left over, but I didn't have a ton. My savings account was almost drained. My portfolio was pretty much worthless. And I didn't have a job. And I couldn't find a job. It's hard competing for shitty tech support jobs versus guys that had, decades worth of industry experience when I only had like 5 years of experience, 6 years of experience. And so it got really bad for me. Or so I thought. In my mind, at that point in time in my life, things were pretty damn bad. Little did I know, things can always fucking get worse, as they did in the subsequent years. But at that point, I was pretty wrecked and ruined and just, yeah. So as the summer dragged on, I just became more and more bitter and angry and depressed, and I got down on myself. And, that's kind of when I turned to drugs. I remember my birthday that summer. I was depressed as fuck, and it was a rainy day, and, I'm just like, fuck it, I need some painkillers, I need some pills, I need something to take away the pain. And so I made a few phone calls, and a friend of a friend of a friend was able to hook me up with some pills, and I bought a few pills off of him. I went home, I took those pills, and I passed out on my bed. Great birthday, whoop-de-fucking-do. I'm 24 years old, I'm jobless, and I'm a fucking loser. That's just what was going through my mind at that point, and it was shitty, and I was a moron. I wish I could go back in time and I could slap the shit out of that person, because I was a fucking moron for feeling that way and thinking my life was over at such a young age. But anyways, I've kind of gone over for this little section of my story. It actually starts to pick up and gets really fucking crazy here right after I bought those pills on my birthday. So I'm going to wrap things up and end things right here for now. And hey, thanks for listening.